Today I want to share with you the 27 best survival foods to stock now in your prepper pantry to help you take action and be prepared during these turbulent times. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferment, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning how to be a modern pioneer in the kitchen, consider subscribing to my channel. And don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. The first thing I want to say is if at any time you want to jump ahead in this video, I'll have very detailed timestamps in the description underneath this video as well as in the pinned comment. I'll also have a link there to the blog post that'll correspond with this video. And in that blog post, I'll have a lot of detail plus a lot of links to free printables that require no email. No matter what type of situations we're going through, we can always feel better as homemakers and home cooks to be as prepared as possible to take care of ourselves, our family, and our friends. And today specifically, I want to talk about how to stock our survival pantry and how to stock it with real food, not having to buy any type of freeze-dried food. And now, what specifically do I mean when I say a survival pantry? Now, in the extended or prepper pantry, we have our backup food supplies that we use to refill our working pantry, where we keep our everyday non-perishable supplies. We also have the emergency pantry, which is a way to be prepared in the event that we don't have running water or we don't have any electricity. And I've shared a lot of information with you about that, and I'll definitely have links to all of those blog posts and videos in the description below. And then next we have our healing pantry, where we talk all about the various either over-the-counter medications or home remedies that we also like to make sure that we have stocked and ready for whatever may come our way in the terms of, your everyday illnesses like colds and flu. The survival pantry is that area of your extended or prepper pantry that you carve out as a space where you can keep food that has a very long shelf life and can sustain you in the event that there is some very severe emergency. And when I say severe emergency, I mean something that's a long-term, extended emergency, where you do need to have food on hand so that you can feed yourself, your family, and your friends. Many of the foods we're going to discuss are considered to be forever foods, meaning that they basically have an indefinite shelf life. Other foods, although they don't have an indefinite shelf life, can be stored in a way that may extend their shelf life for at least 25 years. So in essence, everything that you're going to stock in your survival pantry are foods that should last at a minimum for 25 years. Now, as I share some of these foods, you may be surprised and you may say, Mary, that's not going to probably last more than a year or two. But I've got some tips for you how to extend the shelf life of many of the foods I'm going to be talking about today. The first category of foods that I want to talk about are stocking baking supplies and how best to stock baking supplies in a survival pantry. The first survival food that I want to talk about under baking supplies, number one, all-purpose flour. Now, we've talked about all-purpose flour as something to stock in both our working pantry and our extended pantry, and we've discussed in the past how to put this into 5-gallon bins with maybe some bay leaves to help keep the bugs away, or maybe freezing it first and then letting it dry off and then putting it into our 5-gallon bins to store it, and so on and so forth. We've also talked about how long it can last in those 5-gallon bins, especially if we're opening and closing them. And generally, we've often shared that all-purpose flour stored in 5-gallon bins in that way that you're opening and accessing and using can stay fresh for about 2 years. And after 2 years, sometimes we experience the flour taking on maybe somewhat of a bit of a musty odor that can then transfer to our baked goods. So how do we combat this? How do we store our all-purpose flour so that it lasts a lot longer? Now, the good news is with all-purpose flour, the bran and the germ have been removed. It's just what many people call white flour or plain flour. So that in itself helps extend its shelf life. And that's why we say in those 5-gallon bins, or even just left in the bag like this, that for about 2 years we're in good shape. But what if we want to make this last a lot longer? Can we put this in a Mylar bag with oxygen absorbers? Definitely. But have we sometimes found that that process may put a bit of an odor or a flavoring that is unpleasant into our flour? Yes, some of us have experienced that. So what is another alternative? Well, I really have to thank a lovely woman I met one day when I was out shopping at one of the big box stores like a Costco or a Sam's. And I was buying some flour, and she and I got to chatting, and she shared a wealth of knowledge with me. She was a wonderful, as they say, prepper, and she had so much great information to share that I want to share with you. And that, since I had shared that previously in another video, many of you have contacted me to say that you do the same thing she does, and you've had amazing success at extending the shelf life of your all-purpose flour. So let's talk about what that is. What this lady shared with me, and many of you have shared with me, is that you break your flour down often into maybe 1-pound bags in those little brown sandwich bags, those little brown paper bags that you often will see kids take their lunch to school in. Just a simple plain brown paper bag, and broken down, as I said, into approximately 1-pound packages, or a little more if you think you might use a little more in a particular baking scenario. Then this lady explained to me that she then kind of just seals up the brown paper bag, just folding it over. Then she puts it into a plastic bag, like something along the lines of a Food Saver bag or a Zwilling bag, and then sucks all the air out of it. So what's so nice is that the flour is just touching a brown paper bag. It's not touching plastic. It's not dealing with any sort of oxygen absorber that may create an off flavor. Nothing like that. It's just nicely protected in its brown paper bag, and now it's been sealed in an airtight, the brown paper bag has been sealed in an airtight plastic bag. Then she takes those plastic bags that have now been airtight sealed, puts them into a 5-gallon container, those big white food safe containers that I've showed you in the past in videos where I go over all the various ways to store food, and I'll be sure to link to that below. And then she'll go ahead and put that into her 5-gallon container. Sometimes she'll just throw in some bay leaves or rosemary leaves, different things that she feels will just be, the scent will be off-putting to insects who might otherwise try to get into the bin or whatever the case may be. Other people will use different types of ingredients to discourage various insects, or as I like to say, rodentia. But that's really up to you what you're most comfortable using. But she will put those into her 5-gallon bin. She'll close up her bin, and then she will just take out that plastic airtight sealed bag as she needs. And she found that 5 years, 10 years, how long you go with this, that whenever she opens those bags, the flour smells fresh and it bakes up beautifully. So what a wonderful way to be able to extend the shelf life of your all-purpose flour. Now, if you live in a very highly humid climate or a very damp climate, you may be wondering about silica gel packs and whether or not you should use those. The nice thing about putting the flour in the brown paper bag and then sealing it in the Food Saver or the Zwilling bag really helps prevent against any moisture getting into your flour. You can certainly put a silica gel pack into the bin in which you're storing all of your individual bags if you're worried about any moisture just building up inside of your 5-gallon bin. But for the most part, you probably will find that it's not necessary. Now, if this whole concept that we're talking about, oxygen absorbers, Mylar bags, silica gel packs, and all of that is new to you, don't worry, I have a very detailed video where I go over what the difference is between an oxygen absorber and a silica gel pack, and I'll be sure to link to that below. But I think this tip for storing all-purpose flour is a wonderful way to help us extend our flour shelf life, and specifically plain flours like all-purpose flour, for much longer than 2 years. So we can have this on our shelves, stored in individual bags, take it out as we need it to bake or to use it in other ways for thickening, and it'll be fresh and tasty. Number 2 under baking supplies is bread flour. The nice thing about also stocking bread flour in addition to all-purpose flour is that bread flour is slightly higher in protein and, as the name implies, is perfect for making bread. And because the bran and the germ have been removed from bread flour, just like it's been removed from all-purpose flour, it too has that extended shelf life, but it can even be further extended, as we went through in great detail, as to how to store your all-purpose flour. You want to go ahead and store your bread flour the same way. Now, you might be saying, gee, Mary, all-purpose flour, bread flour, they're not really that nutritious. But if you've been with me for a while, you know that I really like to show you how to make sourdough starter and sourdough bread, which brings back some of the nutrition that is removed by this process where the bran and the germ have been removed. Sourdough breads are more nutritious than just breads made with modern-day packaged yeast. And the nice thing about a sourdough starter is that as long as you have flour, you can make your sourdough starter, and you don't need to rely on packaged yeast from the grocery store, which has a relatively short shelf life, so one that we can't really be considered as, we can't consider it as a survival food. Yes, you can extend its life by keeping it in the refrigerator or the freezer, but we're trying to get away from that and have foods that are non-perishable that we can keep in our survival pantry. And as long as you have all-purpose flour or bread flour, you can then make your sourdough starter by capturing wild yeast, and then you have something with which you can bake bread, with which you can use to rise your bread to bake your bread. And I have a lot of videos on where I show you how to make a sourdough starter, how to maintain a sourdough starter, what to do with the discard, what you have to sometimes remove from your sourdough starter, and how to bake with a sourdough starter. So don't worry at all. I have you covered to learn all about that. And I also cover that in my new book, The Modern Pioneer Cookbook. So that's definitely a wonderful resource. I really consider it more than a cookbook. It's a manual for creating your traditional foods kitchen. And it's wonderful to have it on your shelf so that if for any reason you don't have internet service or something like that, you can easily pull that off your bookshelf and have everything in it that you need to know. I talk about the pantry, the Four Corners pantry, which we'll talk about a little later. I go over sourdough, bone broth, cultured dairy ferments, so many things like that. And I think you'll find that a very helpful manual and a hard copy one. And also don't forget, like I mentioned in the beginning, and I will have links for all of this in the description and in the pinned comment underneath this video. And if I ever run out of room in the description, I'll always just extend all that information in the pinned comment where I have a little more room, is the fact that I will have a lot of links for you to all sorts of downloads that you can printout. So again, you have hard copies on all of the information I'm sharing with you today, as well as lots of other printouts on how to do an inventory before you even start this process. Find out what you already have on hand, as well as how to stock an emergency pantry, one which is where you just gather up food that can provide nutrition for you during just a 2-week period. This is something that I learned and now prepare for, because you never know if there's going to be an ice storm like what we got hit with here in Texas twice. In that emergency pantry list, I not only share food with you, I have a grocery list and a meal plan to show you how to make all these foods without electricity and without clean running water to sustain you for a week. And then if you're still stranded in your home for another week, you can just repeat it. And you'll have enough food all in one box with all the equipment that you need. I also talk about all the supplies and equipment you want to keep on hand. It's very detailed, and it's a very good thing to prepare for right now as we go into the fall and winter months, so that you've got that box all ready to go in the event you find yourself without power or without clean running water. So, but all of those links, I have a lot for you, and no email required. You don't have to worry about that. Print out as many as you want and share them with family and friends, because this is very important that we are prepared as possible for whatever may come our way. Next, under baking supplies, we've got number 3, cornstarch, number 4, baking powder, and number 5, baking soda. Now, you may have all 3 of these in your working pantry. And if corn is a problem for you, you may stock arrowroot powder. That's also a good substitute to be used in the same way you would use cornstarch if corn doesn't agree with you. And you may also be storing these open and unsealed in that part of your extended pantry or prepper pantry where you keep your backup food supplies. But as we know, to a certain extent, these do tend to lose their efficacy over time, even if they're completely sealed. So what you want to do so that you can have these for a very long time is also to treat them the same way you treated your all-purpose flour and your bread flour. Portion out amounts into little brown paper bags and then seal them in a food saver, or as willing, as I mentioned earlier, one of those systems that can create an airtight seal. That will help that will help to extend the shelf life of these 3 items much longer than whatever their best used by date is. Obviously, when it's opened, that starts the clock, so to speak, and you should use them up fairly quickly. But that will also help extend the life past those that are sealed like this. So if the best by date on this is, say, a year or 2 from now, you'll be able to extend that long after that date by sealing it you have to open it, yes, but you're going to extend the shelf life by putting it in an airtight bag, and then in portions that you think you will use. So whenever you go to bake something and you get your bag out of your 5-gallon bin of your 1 pound or 2 pounds of flour, and then you have another bin where you keep your various accoutrements, so to speak, to the whole baking process, and you can just pull out a little bag of baking powder or baking soda. Now, cornstarch is used in different ways. So many traditional cultures, including arrowroot, have recipes that will bake with cornstarch or arrowroot. You may remember the arrowroot biscuits when many of us were babies. I'm not sure if they still make them or what they're made of today, but it's easy to digest and can make like a little cracker, that young children will chew on. But it also works outside of the baking realm, both arrowroot and cornstarch, to thicken soups or stews, gravies, so on and so forth. So having cornstarch or arrowroot in your survival pantry is a very good ingredient to stock. And again, just stock it in small amounts, a tablespoon or 2, whatever you think you might need based on a particular dish you would be making. If you like to bake with cornstarch, you like to bake with arrowroot flour, you can certainly store it in larger amounts. Now, I just wanted to mention something as we go forward. These don't particularly say organic, but you may have noticed that the flours that I shared with you did say organic. And many of you have told me, you either don't have access to the organic, or it's organic items, or it's not something that your store carries, whatever the case may be. And I wanted to address that because some of the items I'll be showing you do have the organic label on them. And that is only because that is what my grocery store carries. I live in Central Texas. I shop at H-E-B. They really are on a mission to provide a lot of organic products under their H-E-B label and make them very affordable. And so that's why you will often see that I do have organic products, and many under the H-E-B label, because that's available to me and it's very affordable. But I want you to buy that which you can afford and is available to you. Most important, no matter what you do when it comes to stocking your pantry, whether it's your working pantry or whether it's any area of your extended pantry, is to stay within your budget. And even in creating your survival pantry, none of this needs to be done overnight. You may even have some foods already in your backup supplies that you keep, your backup food supplies that you keep in your extended pantry, which can be transitioned and stored properly for your survival pantry. And then on your next shopping trip, you can begin to restock your backup food supply, that part of your extended pantry, little by little. The same can be applied to stocking your survival pantry. Over the next month, you can add these foods to your grocery list little by little. And I have a system for you, and I'll be sure to link to it below. It's what I call the accelerated pantry stocking system, something along those lines. But basically what I share with you in that video is to, first of all, you want to do an inventory, you want to know what you have. Then what you want to do just for the next month or two, it might even only be for a couple of weeks. Remove those things from your shopping list that are considered more luxuries. You're not going to eliminate these for forever, but you're just going to eliminate them over the next couple of weeks or over the next couple of months while you work at stocking up the basics, both for your working pantry and your backup supplies. That way, you're not drawing it out over a year or so and being faced with an emergency situation, whether it's bad weather, illness, what we went through in 2020, whatever the case may be, job loss, that you feel secure that you have the basics you need. So you just remove a few of those little luxuries. And I know, dare I say, chocolate. I know everybody was up in arms with me, and I understand completely because I love chocolate. But it's not forever. It's just removing some of those little luxuries over the next couple of weeks, over the next couple of months, so that you can focus your monies, the budget in your grocery, the grocery budget monies, on buying those foods that are most important to feeding yourself, your family, and your friends. So I'll link to all of that, my acceleration pantry system. I'll link to all of that below. And again, you can print all this out, no email required. It's very easy. And having baking soda and baking powder on hand are always wonderful, for working with making your quick breads. And baking soda is just one of those multi-purpose, not only for baking, but cleaning and doing all sorts of things. But having these two on hand for your quick breads is going to be extremely helpful. And I just want to take a minute to talk about that. If you are transitioning, as I say, from what I call a processed foods kitchen, one where you rely on a lot of store-bought items as opposed to making more things homemade, if you're at the very beginning of your journey where you're transitioning from that processed foods kitchen and trying to buy less prepared foods, less packaged foods, so on and so forth, and make things more homemade, jumping right into a sourdough starter and sourdough bread can be very overwhelming. And I talk about this, I write a lot about this in my cookbook, the Modern Pioneer Cookbook. I never want people to feel overwhelmed. And if you are transitioning and if you're stocking your working pantry and your extended pantry and you start to feel overwhelmed, that's not a good thing. You want to take things slowly, step by step. And that's why I like to make sure that you have baking powder and baking soda on hand. Because when you start to make bread, starting with making a quick bread, and as the name implies, it's quick breads are easy. And they give you confidence, they build your confidence, and then you can move up, to trying a sandwich bread with packaged yeast. But again, for the survival pantry, we want to focus on things that we can really extend the shelf life of. Packaged yeast and trying to put that in these vacuum sealed bags may not work as well as it will with baking powder and baking soda. So having these, you can always make sure that you have something on hand that you can make a bread with, you can make biscuits with, so on and so forth. And I want to mention that if at any time as we go through all of this information, if you have any information to share about how you extend the life of various foods in your extended pantry, for whether your survival pantry or your general backup food supplies, I would really like that. I'd really like to hear that in the comments below, because we can all learn from each other. And reading the comments is always so wonderful for me because I've learned so much from so many of you. So I would be interested in hearing your thoughts that if you have tried saving your packaged yeast from the grocery store in an airtight container, in some sort of air-sealed, food saver type system, and if you have found opening that, say 5 or 10 years later, was still very, strong and very able to rise your breads. I know some of us have not had success with that. Yes, the freezer, the fridge, those are wonderful. But again, we want to focus on those things that can successfully be stored for a very long-term time and still maintain their efficacy. So please share in the comments below as we go through this what you have found that you've been able to store very well, and that also opening it many years later still works very well, tastes well, looks good, whatever the case may be. Number 6, under the baking umbrella, extracts. This is a homemade vanilla extract. You can certainly buy it as well. I have a video where I show you how to make homemade vanilla extract. It's very easy, and it's nice because that basically can become a forever food that you can have on hand forever and ever and just keep refilling your jar. It's a very easy extract to make with basically vanilla beans and vodka or some other type of alcohol that you might prefer using. And this could really add wonderful flavor to any of your baked goods, and it's basically a forever food. You can also have other extracts on hand. This one is a peppermint one that I bought at my local grocery store that was actually introducing a new product. They were selling it for a very reasonable price, so I thought that this was perfect to put in my survival pantry. But what I want to share with you is that in addition to showing you how to make vanilla extract, I have a very detailed video where I believe I show you how to make about 10 different types of flavored extracts. And I'll link, whenever I mention any of these videos, I'll be sure to link to them in the description below. But certainly if making homemade extracts isn't something that you want to do, extracts are relatively inexpensive. Vanilla extract can be expensive, but some of these other extracts can be a little more affordable. So I've got peppermint here, if you like lemon. There's all kinds of flavors today. This is a very good thing to have under your baking umbrella so that you can flavor your baked goods, especially your quick breads, with wonderful flavors to enjoy. And the nice thing about these extracts, these flavored extracts, is they really don't require any special storage other than the bottles that they're in. They are made with alcohol. Alcohol basically preserves things, as many would say, for forever. It's just like in the past when we've talked about making tinctures. I shared with you last week about making a star anise tincture and how that can be very helpful to have on hand during cold and flu season. And I do make my tinctures with alcohol, and so basically the shelf life is indefinite. And speaking of tinctures and just speaking of, herbal type preparations in general, I do often recommend that as part of your extended or prepper pantry, you carve out an area that I often refer to as the healing pantry. And then within the healing pantry, to have what I refer to as your herbal medicine cabinet, where you keep your various herbal preparations, whether it's a tincture or an oil or a salve or a tea, whatever the case may be, that can help soothe you when you might be feeling under the weather or have a little bug bite or a scratch or things like that. Having that healing pantry and your little herbal medicine cabinet to turn to within your healing pantry can be very helpful to you. And I have handouts for you for how to put that whole thing together, and I'll definitely link to that below. Number 7, also under the baking umbrella, but also just under the cooking umbrella in general, are whole spices. Now, can you keep the ground counterparts for an extended period of time? Yes. I think we've all talked about that, how often we have found a spice way in the back of our pantry and we've used it and it seemed to be just fine. Maybe you have to use a little extra, maybe not. But those do have a relatively long shelf life, especially your stronger ones like your ground cinnamon, your ground ginger, your ground cloves, your ground allspice. Those do have a good shelf life. Now, would you want to put those in the paper bag and then put them in an airtight sealed plastic bag? That's certainly a possibility, but I'm almost wondering if it's a little too much. I have often found that my ground spices last quite a long time, but that is something to consider. But when I start thinking about a survival pantry, I really like to stock whole spices. I find that it's just nice having them on hand, especially if you're making something like a mulled cider or some type of spiced tea or a spiced herb tea. Having the whole spices to be able to throw in, these are cinnamon sticks, being able to throw into whatever it is you're doing or making is very handy. I've got some cloves here, but so many spices come in their whole form and they're very easy to find today at most grocery stores. And of course you can always order them online. My friend Cian, who has Farmhouse Teas, sells a whole line of tea mixtures, which we'll talk about a little later, but she also carries individual herbs and spices, and she's very generous to give my viewers a discount on her products. And I'll link to all the discount coupon codes I have for you in the description below. I've got a lot, so it's always good to be able to save money for whenever you're buying some things online. But I've got the Ceylon cinnamon sticks that I like to keep handy. I've got whole cloves. You can have star anise, especially if you're making the tincture, but that's also wonderful for making teas. And some of you have shared with me that you add star anise when you're making your, what is the wonderful tonic that we love to keep on hand? For our elderberry syrup, it's a wonderful tonic to have as we go into cold and flu seasons. And some of you have shared with me that you put a lot of different spices in there, like star anise, cloves, cinnamon, so on and so forth. And I have my recipe that I share with you, how I like to make my elderberry syrup. And I'll definitely link to that. That's it's relatively easy to make, and it's wonderful to have on hand to help boost our immunity during cold and flu season. But definitely having whole spices in your survival pantry can come in very handy. And if you have a little grinder, certainly those spice grinders that are electric are wonderful. If for any reason you didn't have electricity available to you, there are a lot of little small hand grinders that are sold today to grind spices, and you can always just use a mortar and pestle with a little elbow grease. Now, there are some other things that are involved when you want to bake, but I have put a few of those other things in different categories because they apply to cooking in general. And I've got some wonderful options for you that have very long-term shelf lives. We'll get to that in a bit, but right now I want to move on to category number 2. And under our second category for beans, we want to have 2 types of beans. Number 8, canned beans. Number 9, dried beans. Now first let's talk about canned beans. You may be saying, but Mary, there's a best by date, a best use by date on any canned item. How can we put canned beans into a survival pantry and expect to open these years from now and have them be satisfactory to eat? Are they palatable? And are they safe to eat? Well, I have good news for you. And I'll be sure to link to all of this information in the blog post that accompanies this video so that you can read up on this and have all of the information right there in front of you. But basically what I will share with you to summarize is that here in the United States, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has said that any food packaged in a can or a bottle or even just a box has basically an indefinite shelf life. Now, there are some caveats there. The items need to not be damaged. The can can't be damaged. The bottle can't be damaged, or the packaging can't be damaged. And it needs to have been stored in a cool, dark, dry area. Under those circumstances, you should be able to open this can years after its best by date. The food should be palatable and safe to eat. So very good news there. Now, let's move on to talking about dried beans. These have also a very long shelf life, and you can store them in many different ways. You can put them in the brown paper bag and then put them into the plastic food saver bag and suck out all the air. You can put these in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers. There's a lot of different ways that you can store dry beans. Now, since there are a number of ways that you can store dry beans, and in doing so, storing them in a way that really protects them from light and oxygen that might otherwise degrade them, that you can store them like this and you can store them for a long time, how are they really going to cook up? Is there the possibility that when you're trying to cook dried beans that are old, that they're just not going to cook, or even if you can cook them, they're not going to be palatable? Well, scientists wondered the same thing. They took relatively fresh dried beans and they took very old dried beans. I think the old dried beans were, if I remember correctly, I'll have to find all this information for you, I think they were 80 years old, which is quite something. Those are really old beans. They cooked up both the freshly dried beans and the very old dried beans. And what they found was, yes, they had to cook the old dried beans a long time. They soaked them and then they cooked them, and they did have to cook them longer than the fresher beans. But then they served them up to the participants who were willing to eat these, who did not know what were the newer beans and what were the older beans. And overall, what they found was that the testers didn't really notice a significant difference. They may have leaned slightly to the fresher beans, but it wasn't anything that was very significant. And then when the scientists studied the beans, they found that the very old beans still had considerable nutrition. Not as much as the fresh beans, but enough that they could be considered more or less a forever food that could sustain people under harsh conditions. So I thought that that was very interesting. So know that you can store dry beans. You can store them for a long time. The better you store them, the better they will last for the long haul, and the better and easier, the better they're stored, the easier they may be able to cook years from now. But keep in mind that they can in fact be cooked. It's just going to take you a little longer, and they may just have a little less nutrition. But both your canned beans and your dried beans are wonderful for your survival pantry. Now, under the third category, we're going to talk about beverages. And of course, water is always important, and you do want to find ways to stock water. If you buy those big plastic containers at the grocery store, they're wonderful for your survival pantry, but you may want to think about rotating them if you're worried about storing something in plastic that is liquid for a very long term or extended period. And you can even do, as many have shared on YouTube, you can home can your water. You can put water in canning jars and process it, and then put that onto your survival pantry shelves. So that's definitely something to look into. But for our survival pantry today, under the beverages umbrella, what I want to talk about are number 10, coffee, and number 11, tea. Certainly you can stock coffee beans, and you can store them in a way that can help extend their shelf life. But coffee beans, like we generally buy them today, where they've been roasted, and maybe you have coffee beans that are caffeinated or decaffeinated, whatever the case may be, do have a somewhat long shelf life when you compare them to ground coffee, just like with anything, how whole grains, which we'll talk about later, have a longer shelf life than whole grain flours, and so on and so forth. But storing for a very long time coffee beans that have been roasted can be difficult, and it can be difficult to retain their freshness and just to keep them so that they are healthy and consumable once ground in to make coffee. Generally, when you look at these long-term plans for storing coffee beans, there's often the recommendation that they're in their green form before they've been roasted. And that may not be practical for many of us. But the good news about that is that instant coffees like this are literally considered forever foods. If you have not opened these, and this one is an instant coffee that is caffeinated, and this is an instant coffee that's decaffeinated. If you have not opened these, they literally can sit on your shelf indefinitely. And when you do eventually go to open them, they'll be fresh. All you need is hot water, and you can have a cup of coffee. Now, you know me, I love coffee. And yes, would I love it to be from freshly ground beans and you know, the ground coffee, all of that? Yes. But when you're talking about stocking foods in a survival pantry that you may need in an extended emergency situation, having something like this to enjoy if you like coffee, or even if, depending on what the circumstances are, you would need to stay awake and you would need some energy. Having an instant coffee like this can be an excellent beverage to keep in your survival pantry. But having coffee beans on hand in your extended pantry, and even in your little 2-week emergency pantry, can work well for you if you have one of those hand grinders and you want to grind the beans and then have your freshly ground coffee. Under those circumstances, that's fine. Today, you know, we're really focusing on the survival pantry, which is talking about long-term food storage and what to do and to have and to use in the event that you're looking at using these foods far into the future. And in that regard, I always think that it's better to have instant coffee on hand than worrying about how to go about trying to keep coffee beans fresh, coffee beans that have already been roasted fresh for such a long-term situation. Next, as I mentioned earlier, number 11, tea. Now, what about keeping tea for the very long haul, for an extended period of time. What if you take a box like this, it's got individually wrapped tea bags, and it is sealed in plastic, although this is not going to be airtight. How long can something like this really last? The good news is, even just stored like this, the U.S. Department of Agriculture will say things like this, as I mentioned earlier, this is just a boxed item and it basically has an indefinite shelf life. Indefinite shelf life in the sense that none of these foods that the USDA talks about go bad, assuming they are stored properly. They may just over time lose some of their efficacy, lose some of their strength, lose some of their nutrition. But when you're talking about long-term stocking a long-term survival pantry, you're not necessarily worried that the taste may be a little less strong than if it was brand new, or if there's a little less nutrition. For the most part, they are going to provide some taste and some nutrition, and that's really what we're thinking of. And when it comes to storing tea, the tea that's going to last the longest is your black tea. Tea like this is going to hold up better for the long term than green tea or white tea or herb teas. Now, do you not want to stock those? No, you certainly can. You just need to be aware of the fact that they're not going to hold up as well if you're thinking of putting this onto your survival pantry shelf and maybe not opening it for 25 years. So hopefully, and I want to say something, hopefully we will never be in that situation, but it's always best to be prepared, because when we're prepared, we feel hopeful, and we don't, God willing, we don't feel as stressed or panicked about things that happen during turbulent times throughout the world. We feel, well, we're doing the best we can, we're taking action, and we're trying to prepare for whatever may come our way. What do they always say? Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Let's continue to always hope for the best, but be prepared. The other tea that I want to mention it's another black tea, and these are also good teas to keep on hand. In addition, this is just sort of your standard black, often like a Pekoe tea. This is a Earl Grey tea. I like Earl Grey very much, and it is flavored with bergamot, and bergamot is very healthful. Now, as with herb teas, they're not, the flavoring in the Earl Grey may not last as long as we would like in terms of its health benefits or its taste. However, the fact that it is a black tea and the tea bags are individually wrapped, I do like to keep some of this on hand as well. And speaking of individually wrapped tea bags, yes, if you can find tea, and specifically tea bags as opposed to loose tea, that is foil wrapped, that the individual tea bags are in foil pouches, all the better. Now, can you do with these somewhat of what we talked about in terms of the paper bag system and the airtight seals? Certainly, that is an option as well. That is an option for a lot of dried foods in which you're not so worried about them, being broken or cracked, like with crackers. Now, do some of these various airtight systems have precautions for that, and you can set it so that it doesn't really squish things? Yes, but the less air you take out, the more chance you are open to things degrading and going stale, especially in the sense of things like crackers. But speaking of crackers, and this is sort of a little bonus tip that I want to share with you, you can make crackers that are meant for long-term storage, and they're called hardtack. And this really goes back in history. And I have a video where I show you how to make hardtack biscuits. They're very easy to make, and they are hard. They're not something that you're going to go ahead and bite into. But they can be a comforting food if down the line you didn't have crackers available to you, but you did have some way to warm a beverage or warm a soup. Hardtack can be dipped into it. It can be broken literally with a survivalist, I guess you could say, and during the times when people use these, whether sadly during war times or on ships and whatnot, and they would just take something heavy like a hammer or something like that and break them into pieces and put them into their soups and so on and so forth. But making hardtack is very easy, and that's a wonderful thing that you can store in your survival pantry. Category number 4 for our survival pantry is dairy alternatives. And I want to take a minute to share with you why I'm saying dairy alternatives and not just dairy. Can you store dried milk in your extended pantry? By all means. It can be a wonderful backup if you find that you've run out of milk. And when I'm saying milk, I'm referring to cow's milk. You could also have under that umbrella sheep's milk and goat milk. And I've shared with you in previous videos about stocking whole milk powder as well as non-fat or fat-free milk powder. And whole milk powder is a great option to keep in your general backup supplies that you use to refill your working pantry, or you can grab off your shelf when you run out of milk and you need some. And I generally recommend storing whole milk powder. However, that's not really a survival food because all of the fat is intact, and so the shelf life is relatively short. So it's something for the working pantry or that part of your extended pantry where you keep your backup foods that you are rotating, first in, first out, and you're rotating, over 6 months or a year so that foods don't go stale and are used up on a regular basis. And whole milk in its powdered form is one of those foods that you really want to use up on a regular basis. So I don't recommend that for a survival pantry. Now, what about the non-fat or fat-free milk where the fat has been removed? Yes, that basically has been turned into a forever food. However, I always have mixed emotions about recommending a food like that. But yes, under emergency situations, if that's something that you want to have on hand, you certainly can. However, you need to know that powdered milk that is in its fat-free form has generally been highly processed. And possibly during that processing time, the protein in the milk has been damaged. And we really want to think about, do we want to put foods that are highly processed and potentially damaged into our bodies? May they do more harm for us than good? And so I highly recommend that you research fat-free and fat-free and non-fat, highly processed, not non-processed, but highly processed powdered milks to learn more about the process that goes on. Are there some that have had the fat removed and are low temp dried and all of that? Yes. But again, you got to look at your budget when it comes to these things because even the whole milk powders, they are generally low temp dried and are in good condition, so to speak, but they're expensive. The same if you are able to find powdered milks that are fat-free or non-fat and have also been low temp dried, and they do exist. I have seen them out there, but again, they are very costly. And you also want to research, can they truly be considered a long-term food, and how best should they be stored so as to protect the nutrition that is in them if they've been properly handled. If you're just looking at the non-fat, fat-free dried milk at the grocery store, at least what's sold in my grocery store, I would rather forgo that and rely on other foods that I think have better long-term shelf lives and are more nutritious and are more in their whole state and not in a potentially damaged state. So that's something that you really want to think about. So in that vein, let's forge ahead and talk about what I think is a good idea to keep on your shelf as an alternative dairy. My two favorites to keep in a survival pantry are coconut milk and coconut cream. Now, I want to mention something about these that I do find to be something that's very interesting and definitely worth exploring as we take more time and attention on stocking forever foods or long-term foods in our survival pantries. I have read that sometimes the cans that have these little pop-top lids may not last as long as those that do not. So this is something I really want to research and find out. Although the U.S. Department of Agriculture says, yes, you can store pretty much any canned food for the long haul, and it basically has an indefinite shelf life, assuming that it is stored correctly and that the cans are not damaged. But I have been reading about this, and I find this interesting. And I just want to make sure that when it comes to a survival pantry, I'm always stocking the foods in their proper form, so to speak, to make sure that, yes, I'm doing everything in my power to extend their shelf life. So that's a little caveat. I just wanted to mention that to you, and it's definitely worth us all researching and learning more about. But the reason now, there's all sorts of alternative dairies today, but I specifically like to keep these for a number of reasons. Number one, they come in cans, which is very handy to put into a survival pantry. And this is also a very good way to extend shelf life of anything in a can. And secondly is because coconut milk and coconut cream are very nutritious. They contain good fats that are hard to find in other foods, but that are exceptionally good for our brains. And so that is why I like to make sure that I do incorporate some type of coconut products into our diet, and to also keep these on hand in a survival pantry where we'll want to make sure that we have good fats that can nourish us, can fill us, and that can also nourish our brains. That's very important. Also, coconut oil contains fats that are very good at boosting our immunity. And so the more we can work coconut milk and coconut cream into our diets, the better. And for the coconut milk and the coconut cream, I want to mention that what I stock are both unsweetened. And whenever we can limit adding additional sugars into our diet, all the better, because often products that are canned and sweetened are sweetened with white sugar. And yes, there are times that we need to use white sugar, whatever the case may be. However, we really want to limit it because white sugar can often add to a whole host of health problems, but it's also been linked to affecting our immunity, lowering our immunity. So if we're trying to do everything in our power to continually boost our immunity, we really want to pull back on those foods that may lower our immunity, may cause inflammation, may link or lead to serious illness, and so on and so forth. So I do like to find these in their unsweetened form. Now, you may be wondering, why am I not showing like evaporated milk or condensed milk? Again, condensed milk is, you may also know it as sweetened condensed milk. It is a sweetened milk product, and it's very thick. And so again, it's often processed with white sugar, so the less we can put those types of things in a survival pantry, the better. Occasionally, once in a while, you want to use it to make a pumpkin pie or something. I completely understand. I even show you how to make your own sweetened condensed milk. It's very easy to do. But again, when you're talking about a survival pantry, when you're talking about trying to keep foods on hand that can not only fill you up, but also nourish you, that's something you always want to be running through your brain. And the reason that I don't share evaporated milk, certainly you can add that if that is something that you feel is something you're going to need or something that's important to you. But again, you have to keep in mind that the evaporated milk that's sold at the grocery store in the cans has probably been canned under high pressure, and the fats in it, if it's a full fat version, may be damaged, and even if it's a fat-free version, the proteins may be damaged. These are things you really want to research and make your own decisions on, and even maybe if it's important to you to have those, to look for those brands that may talk about low temp processing and things like that. But I find that overall, it's just easier to keep coconut milk and coconut cream. They store well. They're canned in a way that maintains the majority of their nutrition and is protective to their fats. And so this is something that I think is an excellent food to keep in a survival pantry. So seriously consider coconut milk and coconut cream for your survival pantry. Category number 5 are fats. What are some of your best shelf-stable fats that can last a very long time? Number 14, coconut oil. We're on a little coconut trend here. And number 15, ghee or clarified butter. Now, if you buy these products, both of them will contain best by dates. But as we've already discussed, foods in jars and cans and packages, so on and so forth, that have been stored correctly can last a very long time and may just lose some of their strength or some of their flavor. But when it comes to these fats, they really can retain a lot of their nutrition and a lot of their flavor for a very long time. And when it comes to ghee or clarified butter, many people will consider this a forever food. It's basically butter that has been melted and that the milk solids have been removed, which is what would spoil in the shorter term. And then you're simply left with what looks like a butter oil. And when it comes up to room temperature or is refrigerated, it is in a solid form. It's a little softer at room temperature, a little harder in the refrigerator, or you can even put it in the freezer. It does look solid like this. However, it can be left at room temperature for a very long time. And you'll see it's very yellow, it's very nutritious, it's excellent for you. It's also easy to make homemade. In my cookbook, I show you how to make ghee, how to make clarified butter. These types of things are not difficult to make on our own. But if you want something for your survival pantry, buying something like this that has been professionally prepared for you and then put in an airtight seal can be a very good investment for your survival pantry. But again, many people will make this homemade and they will put this in their survival pantry, just stored in a nice airtight jar or some other type of vessel that is very airtight, and then stored in your cool, dark, dry survival pantry area. And if you're wondering what's the difference between ghee and clarified butter, it's a very small difference, but it does affect the flavor. When you make ghee, you allow the milk solids to sink down to the bottom and brown up toast in essence a bit, and that imparts a lovely flavor into the ghee. In clarified butter, which you will find more, and this is generally, you often hear it used in Indian recipes. In the case of clarified butter, that's often used like in French recipes, and is where once the milk and the milk solids and the butter oil separate, the milk solids are quickly removed. And so you have this lovely product, but it has less flavor in essence compared to the ghee. And the reason why this is done is because by removing the milk solids, not only do you increase the shelf life of your butter product, and it can be left at room temperature, Plus, you increase the smoke point. So you can cook with ghee and clarified butter at higher temperatures than you could with butter. Because with butter, if you make it go too hot, or if you try to cook with it at too hot a temperature, the milk solids would burn. So that's why many chefs like ghee or clarified butter. But it also, for our particular circumstances, we like the fact that it increases the shelf life and allows it to be at room temperature and have a very long shelf life indeed. The same goes for coconut oil, and again, not unlike the coconut milk and the coconut cream, coconut oil offers a great deal of nutrition for our body, for our immunity, for our brains. It's a wonderful fat, and it's a highly saturated fat, and can be kept at room temperature, and many, like ghee, consider this to be a forever food. You can purchase this in a nice jar like this, sealed tight, unopened. Put this into your survival pantry. It's going to last a very long time, and it's going to be an incredibly useful fat for both cooking and just overall nutrition. Adding it if you've got whole grains and you're making something with like oat groats, for example, the whole oat, and you're making an oatmeal and you want to add some good fat to it, coconut oil can be a wonderful fat to not only help with nutrition, but it's filling. And as I mentioned, it has a whole host of wonderful properties. The ingredients that are contained in coconut oil, the compounds that are contained in coconut oil, provide a lot of benefits to our overall health. Now, what about animal fats, fats that actually come from the animal's body? Yes, cream does come from the cow, and you are making butter with it and then eventually turning it into a ghee or a clarified butter. But now let's talk about the actual fat on the animal's meat. Is it possible to have animal fats like that you can store in a survival pantry? And the answer is sort of twofold. Something like lard from the pig is a little more difficult to store at room temperature, basically indefinitely or long term. Lard is best refrigerated or maybe kept at room temperature for about 6 months. And there are a lot of variations on this, on where you buy the lard, how it was made, what type of lard. Is it leaf lard? Is it just the regular lard? So there's a lot that is involved with lard determining its shelf life. So let's talk instead about tallow. Tallow is a fat that has been rendered from beef suet. Beef suet is the fat that surrounds the organs of the cow, specifically like around the kidneys. And the term for that fat is suet. How about the fat that you might just cut off a steak and find in different roasts and so on and so forth? That's just your sort of standard beef fat. Can that be rendered into a usable cooking fat? Yes, but technically, although people use the term somewhat interchangeably today, technically it's not tallow. And technically it's a little softer, and technically it may have a little bit higher water content, and technically it's probably best used within a year and only kept at room temperature for a year. But if you get suet, beef suet, and you render it properly, you have something called tallow. And tallow is very hard, and it has a very long shelf life. So tallow is definitely something that you can consider keeping for a survival pantry. And what's nice about tallow, as opposed to these two fats, is that it has its whole host of nutrients that are good for our body, but it also is very good to use to make various preparations for our skin and our hair and so on and so forth. And if you're in a situation where you want to have some type of very natural moisturizers, tallow is wonderful. It's very compatible with our skin. You have to be a little careful with coconut oil because coconut oil is a cotomagenic if I'm pronouncing that correctly, cotinogenic fat, in meaning that it can clog your pores. So although there are traditional cultures that do use coconut oil for the body, it can be fine in that regard. But if you tend to be someone who breaks out with a lot of blemishes, or you have skin irritation problems, coconut oil is probably not the best oil for your face. Tallow, on the other hand, rarely has a strong beef smell, and that's why it's a very prized fat when it comes to beef fats, because given that it is rendered from the suet, it's very hard, relatively odorless. It's wonderful not only to consume as a food, it also can be used as a beauty product. Plus, it's wonderful for frying, for deep frying, because tallow has a very high smoke point. I mentioned this a little earlier when we were talking about ghee and clarified butter. Smoke point simply means the point at which you can heat the fat before it starts to smoke, and you don't want it to smoke because smoking indicates that the fat is becoming damaged. But tallow has a very high smoke point. It's great for deep frying, and it's also very good for us, and it can also be used for beauty products. So it's sort of an all-around type of fat. And if that's something you'd like to learn how to make, I have a very detailed video where I show you how to take suet and turn it into tallow. And then I have also a number of videos where I show you how to not only cook with tallow, like frying beef liver nuggets that I've shared with you in the past, but also how to take that tallow and turn it into a face cream and into a absolutely glorious foot cream. So know that that is definitely something that you want to consider for your survival pantry, because yes, it does have a very long shelf life at room temperature. And now, if you don't want to go through the process of the suet and rendering it into tallow, yes, you can buy tallow. You just want to make sure that whoever you buy the tallow from is guaranteeing to you that it is in fact tallow and not just beef fat. You want to make sure that it is something that was rendered from suet. And that left, just keep it closed, buy it, put it on your survival pantry shelf, and it's going to have a very long shelf life. Category number 6, pasta, and specifically number 16, durum semolina pasta, and number 17, egg pasta. Now, all of these pastas in front of you are made with durum semolina flour, and I stress that because you always want to make sure that the pasta that you buy is made from durum semolina, because durum semolina is a special type of, in essence, we'll call it a flour, but what it is the middlings. And what the middlings mean is that during the process of milling durum wheat, you have the, in essence, all-purpose durum wheat that now is an ingredient to be used. And then you have the bran and the germ that's basically been removed from the durum wheat that has been processed. And then you have something called the middlings. And the middlings are kind of a mixture of a little bit of the durum wheat, a little bit of the germ, a little of the bran. You know, you just got a mixture of everything. And it makes for wonderful pasta. And the nice thing about durum semolina is that it's more nutritious than an all-purpose flour. It's more nutritious than a flour that has had all the bran and the germ removed. Plus, keep in mind that if you ever like to make homemade pasta, then search out semolina, because technically you should be making your pasta with semolina, not all-purpose flour. Now, these are just your basic durum semolina pastas, and as you can see from all of this, I'm not brand loyal. I buy what I can find that is a good quality pasta product, and usually one that's on sale, or in the case of this one, I believe I was able to buy a package of 6 at one of the big box stores like a Costco or a Sam's. And this is a wonderful, in essence, forever food. it's just a matter of storing these correctly. Now, this is in a bag. This is not airtight. You could certainly put it in something airtight, but you could also store this in a 5-gallon bin with other packages of it. You could throw in some silica gel packs if you're worried about moisture or condensation, anything like that, but stored in a cool, dry, dark place. This is going to stay fresh for a very long time. Spaghetti like this that's in a box, all you have to really think about is protecting it from weevils, because this is not, it's not airtight and it's not sealed particularly well. But what's nice is these are perfect for putting into those plastic bags that we talked about earlier and using a food saver or some similar device to make this into an airtight container, which is what I think is a very good idea. Can you just sort of pile these up in 5-gallon bins and throw in some bay leaves and something like that to discourage insects? Yes, you can certainly do that, and that's something that I do, especially for the backup food supply that I keep in my prepper pantry or my extended pantry. But I'm going through this relatively quickly. If we want to really think about putting something like this into our survival pantry that we may be opening years from now, I like the idea of putting these in some type of packaging that is really going to cut down on any air circulation. And so that's why those food saver options can be very good for that. With something like this that's in a bag, this is sealed quite well. I'm not as concerned about this, but certainly that's personal preference and it's going to be different for everyone. You can certainly go ahead and put this in one of those plastic bags and seal it up to really protect it from air and bugs and so on and so forth. But I have had very good luck for many years, just my pastas that come like this, just storing them in the 5-gallon bins and just throwing in a bunch of bay leaves to keep other bugs away and whatnot. I've never had any problem. The same with bags like this that are sealed. So you can certainly experiment, but you can do whatever you feel is most comfortable. So now let's take a minute to talk about this. This is a pappardelle. These are wonderful, served with hearty meat sauces like a bolognese. And this is an egg pasta. This is also made from durum semolina, but it also includes egg. But you don't need to worry in terms of its perishable status because the eggs have been basically dried and they now have become somewhat, in terms of being in the pasta, one of these foods that has an indefinite shelf life. So this is perfect. It gives you a little more protein than just the plain durum semolina pasta, but either way, both of these pastas have very long shelf lives and are perfect for a survival pantry. So far we've covered 6 categories of foods, and under those categories, so far we have identified 17 foods that are perfect for our survival pantry. I have another 6 categories for you coming up, and another 10 foods under those categories. Now, before we cover those next 6 categories and additional 10 foods, I just want to take a second to explain about the Four Corners Pantry. Now, if you're very familiar with this, it's easy. If you check the timestamps, you can jump ahead. But I know to many of you, this is a new concept. And so I just want to give a brief overview about the Four Corners Pantry. We're talking a lot about the prepper pantry. I'm throwing terms out about emergency pantry, survival pantry, backup food pantry, all these different terms. And so I just want to take a little time to explain what this system is all about. First of all, the Four Corners Pantry is very easy to understand. It basically has, as the name implies, 4 corners. The first corner is your working pantry. That's where you store your non-perishable foods that you access on a daily basis. It can be a little closet, a cabinet, whatever the case may be. The second corner is your refrigerator. The third corner is your freezer. And the fourth corner is your extended pantry. And we often nickname it the prepper pantry. And your prepper pantry fills many roles. It has, in essence, mini pantries, so to speak, underneath that banner of the term extended or prepper pantry. Most likely, the largest area of your extended or prepper pantry is that area which you devote to storing your backup foods or your reserve foods. And these are foods that you stock up from time to time. Maybe you find them on sale, or they're just simply things that you use on a regular basis, and you want to have them handy to restock the supplies in your working pantry when those supplies fall low, so that you're not always having to run out to the grocery store because you ran out of X or Y or whatever the case may be. And it gives you a nice cushion over time to stock up, whether it's 2 weeks worth of food, a month worth of food, 2 months, whatever is appropriate for you. It gives you a nice cushion of food in the event that you run into a situation where you can't get to the grocery store. You might be ill, you might have lost your job and money is very tight for you. There might be some bad weather, but one in which you still have power and water. You're not worried about necessarily accessing your emergency pantry, which we'll talk about in a minute. There's varied reasons why it's always smart to have food in an extended pantry or a prepper pantry that simply serves as backup food. And it also allows you in the long run to save money, because when you see things on sale, you can pick up an extra 1 or 2 packages or cans or boxes, whatever it is you're buying, so that you take advantage of that sale price. And you also save money in the sense that you're not running out all the time to get this ingredient or that ingredient, using gas, and maybe paying a higher price for the particular product. So having that backup food to help you always have something in reserve to restock your working pantry is a plus. So that's your backup food pantry. Then you've got 3 other areas of your extended or prepper pantry. The next area of your prepper pantry is what we call the emergency pantry. And I alluded to that before when I shared with you that that's where you basically want to keep a box of food that is very shelf stable and that can last you 1 to 2 weeks in the event that you may not be able to get to the store for whatever the case may be. It's usually something that's very helpful during bad weather where you lose power and clean running water, but you are still staying in your home. You're not bugging out, as the expression goes. You're staying in your home, but you don't have any electricity and you don't have any clean running water. That's what your emergency pantry is all about. And I have a very detailed video where I go over all of this, actually multiple videos. And how this is different than the survival pantry is in your emergency pantry, you can have things like peanut butter and nuts and crackers and cookies, things that you're not looking at trying to keep fresh for 25 years or something like that. You are going to use those when an emergency hits during the course of that year. And if you're very fortunate and you never have an emergency, that's wonderful. You can just rotate those things right into your backup pantry and start using them to basically refill your working pantry. But the emergency pantry goes one step further than just the food. You also want to keep in there the meal plan that first of all, I give you a grocery list and I tell you what to shop for and what to put in your emergency pantry box. And then I also give you a meal plan. And so you want to keep the meal plan with that food. Also, I share with you what equipment you're going to need to prepare that food in the event that you don't have electricity and or you don't have clean running water. You don't need to worry. You're going to have everything you need to be prepared for a short-term emergency. And I have printouts, and again, no email required. I have all of this. I'll link to all those videos. I've put them in a playlist for you to make life very easy. And you can print out the shopping list and the meal plans to your heart content. Share them with your friends, your family. It's a wonderful way to be prepared, as we needed to be prepared when we had a basic snowstorm / ice storm, which was very unusual here in Central Texas. I believe that was 2021. And then in January of 2023, we had another very bad ice storm. And having those emergency pantry supplies was extremely helpful. And all you really need in there is 2 weeks, along with all the equipment that you're going to need to be prepared and your meal plan. And you will be very happy to know that you're not going to be in a bad situation where you don't know what to do because you don't have any ability to prepare food. This way you're going to have the food you need and you're going to know how to prepare it. And hopefully within 2 weeks, whatever situation we're involved, whatever type of emergency situation we're involved, can be resolved. If not, then you have what we're talking about today, your survival pantry to fall back on. After your emergency pantry, I have what I call the healing pantry. And I think this is so important to always make sure that you have on hand what you need for a particular season to help you with the minor ailments that can arise in anyone's home. Something that is not necessary, that where you're not having to go to the doctor right away or you're not having to go to the hospital right away. It's something where you might be dealing with a cold or a small scrape or a bug bite, all these different things that can arise in the home. And your healing pantry should contain those things that you like. They may be as simple as just different over-the-counter products like aspirin and cough medicine, whatever the case may be. You want to make sure you have that well stocked to get you through at least 1 year. And then those things, looking at best by date and whatnot, does become a little more important. Our government has told us that yes, many of these things do continue to have efficacy, do continue to have strength after their best use by date or after their expiration date, but they do begin to lose some of their efficacy. So you don't have to necessarily throw them out, but you want to make sure that you have a good supply for what you like to use and what you think you might need. Now, you may like keeping homeopathic products on hand. That's perfect for your healing pantry. And it's nice because you keep everything in one place. And you keep it with also the books you need to understand your homeopathy and how to take those preparations appropriately. I also like to have what I call my herbal medicine cabinet. And that's like a little area, so to speak, that I carve out within my healing pantry. And again, I have a detailed video all about this. I have a blog post about this. I have printouts for you. Again, no email required, so that you can start building, in essence, and stocking your healing pantry. And if you want, carving out a little area that I do call the herbal medicine cabinet. And basically what I have in there are those herbal preparations that don't require refrigeration. Some I do refrigerate, but I keep them all in a plastic bin together right in my refrigerator. I know where they are, and they're handy and easy to access. But those that are non-perishable, I keep in this herbal medicine cabinet, so to speak. And it's just a little area that I carve out within my healing pantry. And in there I keep herbs that I like to have on hand, different supplies I may need to make herbal remedies, books that help me understand certain herbs. I just keep it all together in one place, as well as anything that I've created that is non-perishable and can be kept there, like different salves. You know, if you get a bug bite, I know exactly where it is. I don't have to worry about searching around for it. I keep it all in my little herbal medicine cabinet within my healing pantry. And I highly recommend, if this is something that's interesting to you, and I discuss this in my healing pantry video and in the blog post, get yourself some good books about herbs. You can never go wrong with any book by Rosemary Gladstar. She has been writing about this, I believe, since the 1970s, and she is a wonderful resource to learn all about herbs, how to make herbal remedies, how to use herbal remedies. It's just terrific. And so you can't go wrong with her. Now, of course, I always share the caveat, you need to be very knowledgeable about herbs, and you need to be very careful about what herbal preparations you take, given whatever your particular situation may be, like pregnancy or nursing, or using them with children, or if you're taking other medications over the counter or prescription, or even if you have allergies. You know, you do want to check with your healthcare professional, your medical professional, whoever that might be, to make sure that whatever herbs you decide to use, that they are appropriate for you personally, for your particular situation. And speaking of that, my friend Heidi offers a course, and it's absolutely wonderful. She has a wonderful knowledge about herbs, and she also offers a discount for her classes. They're online, and she has a variety of classes, but there are some that are really directed to making individual herbal preparations, you know, for the family. And I'll definitely link to that below. And my other friend, Cian, I mentioned her earlier from Farmhouse Teas, she also sells a lot of herbs that you can use to make the various herbal preparations you can learn to make from Heidi. And her school of, I believe it's the School of Botanical Arts and Sciences, and she's got a full line of online classes that you can take. And I'll link all of that information in the description below. And then the final area of our extended or prepper pantry is what we're talking about today, your survival pantry. And this is the area that you're going to designate in your extended or prepper pantry to be those foods that you are not going to touch. You know that they have a very long shelf life and that they can help you years from now if you find yourself in a difficult situation. Now, can you rotate those out from time to time if you want? Certainly, you can rotate those out into your emergency pantry. You can rotate those out into simply your backup food supply pantry, or you can rotate them even right directly into your working pantry. But you always want to make sure that you are restocking that pretty quickly and that you are staying on top of the fact that what you have in there does cover all of these different groups that we're talking about. You don't necessarily need every single food that I'm showing you under sort of the umbrella groups. Like if you want to keep ghee and not coconut oil when we talked about fats, that's fine. But you want to make sure that you have something that represents, in essence, each group that we're talking about. And we're going to talk about 12 groups of foods and a total of 27 foods. So it's very important that you do monitor that. If that's your job, to be in charge of the pantry, including the prepper pantry, you want to make sure that you stay on top of your survival pantry to make sure that you do have something that is represented by every group, because that will give you a full line of nutrients, in essence, from the foods that you will be eating from your survival pantry. And the nice thing about this too is these are just real foods that we can buy at our local grocery store and have assurance that they are going to last a long time and can be within our budget. Because maybe having freeze-dried foods very nice, certainly, but they can also be very expensive. And very few of us, and I don't have one, have freeze dryers. So if you're not in a situation where you can afford freeze-dried food, or you're not in a situation to purchase a freeze dryer and make your own freeze-dried foods, then knowing that there are still things you can do to be as prepared as possible for a long-term emergency situation is, at least I find it very comforting to know. So that's an overview of the Four Corners Pantry, as well as all of the little sub or mini pantries under the umbrella of the term extended or prepper pantry. Now let's move on to our remaining 6 categories. Category number 7 is a broad category. We're going to talk about the proteins that you want to consider keeping in your survival pantry. So under the umbrella of protein, for your survival pantry, you want to think about number 18, canned fish and canned meats. Specifically here I have canned chicken. I love keeping canned fish on hand. And here I've got the Kipper snacks. I've shared recipes with you about how to use kippers. I've also shared recipes with you for sardines. You can keep a whole host of canned fish on hand. And why I like this is because number 1, it's very affordable. And number 2, as long as you keep this in a cool, dry, dark place, stored properly, it should have a very long shelf life. But more importantly than that, when you go to open it and eat it, this is extremely nutritious. Small fish like this, whether it's kippers or sardines, anchovies, they're a little salty to just eat individually, but they do make wonderful additions to other foods. Any small fish that you enjoy like this it's a very nutrient-dense food. It's very rich in omega-3s, and the omega-3s are fats that are very good for the heart and very good for the brain. And so having foods like this in a survival pantry are very important because they're nutrient-dense, meaning that calorie for calorie, given the size of the food, gives you a lot of nutrition, that a small amount of food gives you a great deal of nutrition. And that's very much the case for small fish like this. And following along with the USDA guidelines, assuming that this is all stored correctly, it should have a very long shelf life. And yes, might it decrease a little bit in nutrition, but is it still nutritious? Is it still safe to eat if it's been stored properly? And if when you go to open it, it looks okay, certainly we have to always use common sense. We may store things properly, but if we open them and they don't look right or they don't smell right, definitely then you would want to discard it. But if we follow these USDA guidelines and we store it correctly and we open it and it looks okay, it is assumed safe to eat. And having fish like this, you can never go wrong. This is incredibly nutrient dense, very good for us. And what I want to talk about here with the canned chicken is this to me is like a runner-up. I would like to be able to keep some canned meat, red meat on hand. I find it very difficult to find locally. Maybe you will have better luck in your area. Maybe at some of the big box stores. I have seen it there from time to time, but in the past I never thought to purchase it. I did buy the canned chicken because I will use this to kind of make quick recipes. I have recipes on YouTube. I'll definitely link to in the videos. I'll definitely link to that in the description below for how to use canned chicken to make quick and easy meals. And this, I think this has come down a little bit in price. For a while, this was really skyrocketing. It's not back down to the levels that we were familiar with it a few years ago, but hopefully, and also hopefully you can find this. It was out of stock in many places for a long time, but hopefully you can find some of this. And if you like chicken and you want to put this on your shelves, on your survival pantry, definitely something to think about, and also something if you, in your travels, if you can find the meat as well. I think sometimes it says like canned roast beef, things like that. Next, under the protein umbrella, I like to include canned soups. and also these type of soups that are in the aseptic packaging. Under normal circumstances, we don't rush necessarily to use things like this, whether in this packaging or in cans, but because it's so easy to make homemade soups. But having these as a backup in your survival pantry is a good idea. Number one, they're generally affordable. And number two, if you get things like this that are a chicken noodle soup, they have chicken in them, so they do have some protein in them. And then this particular soup, this is a lentil soup. This, as with all whole grains, do contain protein. Not as efficient for us as eating the actual animal protein. And there's often, you read about various what would you call them, like meal planning rules when you just eat whole grains to rely on for your protein sources, often combining them in various ways to make sure you're giving yourself a complete or a full protein. But as a backup, and especially for people who do eat various things like this, you could look at this also in context of your beans and your bean soups. They have protein. Lentils have protein. And you can also have dried lentils. They cook up very quickly. Dried split peas, things like that. They all contain protein, and they're all relatively easy to cook. Now, the beans do take a little bit longer soaking and so on and so forth, but split peas and lentils cook up very quickly, and the dried versions can be stored for a very long time and will still cook up relatively quickly. If you've ever tried that, you know that if you found some old lentils or old split peas in your pantry, that they did actually cook up relatively quickly. So I do want to just put this under the protein category, that keeping some soups that actually have some type of meat in them is a very good idea. But then also having your soups like lentils, split peas, or other grain-based soups also are a good option. These all have protein, and they can all be very useful when stored on the shelves in your survival pantry. Category number 8 is salt, and I want to talk a little bit about each of these in detail. Number 20 is sea salt, and number 21 under the salt category is iodized sea salt or iodized salt. And this is just a little bonus we'll talk about in a minute. But I want to talk about these two different salts because they serve different roles, and it's important that in a survival pantry you stock both of these. The good thing about stocking sea salt is that it's very rich in minerals, and we always want to make sure that when we're stocking a survival pantry, that we not only, in essence, cover all the categories of foods that we may need for proper nutrition, we want to make sure of just that we have not just the foods, but also the seasonings that add to our proper nutrition, that add to the vitamins and minerals that we need to keep our bodies healthy and strong and functioning. Now, what I've got here is the Redmond Real Salt, and this is very rich in minerals. There are a lot of sea salts out there. Many of you have told me you like the Redmond Real Salt, and I definitely have a discount coupon code for my viewers from the Redmond Real Salt Company. They're very kind to provide that. And again, I'll have links to all the description codes, discount codes, discount codes in the description underneath this video. So if you want to buy any of these things online, you can take advantage of using those discounts. Something that's very interesting recently about sea salt that my friend Kay over at Late Bloomer, she's got a wonderful homestead in Tennessee, Kay Cottrell, and she was asking me where I buy my gray salt, the Celtic gray salt. And I hadn't thought about it in a while because I have a large supply. And she said that you can't find it. And I went online and I looked, and she was totally right. And if you are able to find a little something here or there, it's extremely expensive, much more expensive than it's ever been in the past. And when you go to the Celtic Sea Salt site, everything's sold out, sold out, sold out. So it proves to you that gosh, when you can buy something and stock up on it, it's a good time to do it, and as I've stressed in my Prepper Pantry videos, we're never hoarders. We're not the people who are rushing to the store, clearing the shelves, at the last minute, because we stock these things little by little by little. And so over time, we've built up our Prepper Pantries that we have to rely on, and don't have to run out at the last minute, and don't have to worry when things do sell out or are out of stock, because we've just been buying things little by little, 1 or 2 extra at a time, not clearing the shelves, so to speak. But the good news is that Redmond Real Salt is still very much available. And so this is a good thing to have in your survival pantry because it is rich in minerals. Now, the only thing about sea salts is that you can't really count on them for their iodine count. And why is that important? Because iodine is something that's very good for our thyroids. And if we don't have sufficient iodine in our diet, we can develop goiter. And that's where the thyroid becomes very enlarged and isn't functioning properly. Now, that said, salt, I'm not sure exactly when, but back in history, at least here in the United States, salt started to contain iodine. And the reason was that people in the middle part of our country who were not able to obtain fish were developing goiter. And so by iodizing the salt, the people were able to avoid that happening to them. Now, we live in a very different world, a very different society. Most people have plenty of iodine in their diet, and so it's nothing to worry about. However, when you start thinking about a survival pantry and that certain foods may be limited, you don't 100% know what the future holds. So you want to make sure that you also stock some iodized salt. And this just happens to be an iodized sea salt. But for a survival pantry, an emergency, an extended emergency situation, any iodized salt you can find will be important to have on hand in your survival pantry. Now, I have this little thing here of Nu-Salt, and I just want to mention this briefly to you. And the reason that I always think that this is something that's good to keep on hand as well is this, and I have no connection to this brand, but I like this brand because it is just potassium chloride. It has no other chemicals, anti-caking agents. It doesn't have any of that in it. And this is basically a good source of potassium. Potassium helps balance your sodium levels. And if you're wanting to make in essence, like a homemade beverage that's like a sports drink or an electrolyte drink, something to help you if you have really perspired tremendously and you feel you may have lost electrolytes, having both the sea salt and the potassium chloride, and actually a third ingredient would be maybe some magnesium glycinate, and you can just get a capsule and open it to make your own electrolyte drink, can be very helpful to have on hand. Now, there are a lot of old-fashioned ways to make electrolyte drinks, and I have videos where I show you how to make what's often called today, or when was called back in the 17 and 1800s, a haymaker's punch. And that's basically some vinegar, some water, a little natural sweetener, maybe molasses, and that helped the farmers quench their thirst and also replenish their electrolytes. And I'll link to that video where I show you how to make that. But if you want to have some things in your survival pantry that are ready to go and easy to make an electrolyte drink, having your sea salt, having your Nu-Salt, your potassium chloride, and then maybe some magnesium capsules can be extremely helpful. I show you how to make that electrolyte drink in that video I mentioned. Very easy to do, and you can even mix up, as I show you in that video, mix these up in advance so that you can just put them in a jar. You can put them on your survival pantry shelf or anywhere, because you can use these in your working pantry, your extended pantry. salt, these are forever foods. You know, they have an incredibly long shelf life. And so you can just put these on, you can make these up in advance, put them in your survival pantry, or keep them in their individual forms, whatever you want to do. So you always have this handy. And then you've got your iodized salt. You may not be using this on a regular basis. You may have no need to be using this on a regular basis. But in the event of a long-term emergency, where if there were food shortages, or you didn't have your canned fish, or you couldn't get fresh fish, this would be a very good supplement, in essence, to have on hand. Now, maybe you're saying, oh, Mary, you're referring to this as a sea salt. It's mined. And yes, it's mined here in the USA on what were once seabeds. So in essence, all salt basically is sea salt. It's salt water that has evaporated and now can be mined or taken from the sea and dried. But yes, this is mined, but it is considered a natural sea salt, mined from what were ancient seabeds. Category number 9 is seasonings, and this is a very broad category. So I've simply said that number 22 of our foods for our survival pantry is seasonings. Very much like when I talked about the spices to keep on hand for your baking area of your survival pantry, I like, if I can, to keep seasonings that are in their whole form. Black peppercorns are a great example of this. I would much rather store black peppercorns than black pepper that's already been ground. And I have a pepper mill that's a manual thing. I don't have to worry about any electricity. I can just put my peppercorns into my pepper mill and grind my fresh pepper. So this is a really great option when you want to put things on a survival pantry that you want to store for a very long time. I have the crushed red pepper flakes here, as opposed to just like, chili powder and things like that. You can have all sorts of seeds, cumin seeds, coriander seeds, whatever you like. And they can easily be crushed in different types of grinding mills that require no electricity, or they're very easy to crush in a mortar and pestle, which is often what I'll do when I'm cooking and I really want that burst of great flavor. Now, do they have Best By dates and all of that? Yes. But I think most of us who are home cooks have found that our various spices in whole form hold their flavor long after any Best By date. Now, as we also talked about with the spices in the baking section of this video, I also keep a lot of ground spices, especially blends. Like this is a green ancho chili blend. This is, oh my gosh, I love this. It's so delicious. And then here I've got some ground, this is garlic powder. So I keep these too because, as many of us have shared, in comments and emails, that we find even after a very long time, our spices that are ground, like our cinnamon or our cloves, are they as strong as the day we bought them? Probably not. But are they still pretty good and maybe we just need a little extra? Yes, they're wonderful. And so that's how I feel about these too. I feel these are going to last a very long time. If I had to use them years from now, would I probably need to use a little extra? Yes, maybe so. And now this is actually from my working pantry. I'm actually using this right now. But for things I put on my survival pantry, I just don't open them. And I just put them sealed right on the shelf and leave it be and know that if I have to open this at some point way into the future, it's probably going to be okay. And maybe initially would I have used a teaspoon? Maybe years from now, maybe a tablespoon? Yes, but I do think there's still going to be flavor as well as some nutrition to them. So it's really, when it comes to this category, it's really what seasonings do you like for your food? What spices, what herbs, what do you like? And I think spices overall hold up better than dried herbs. I think herbs begin to lose some of their efficacy, some of their strength, some of their nutritional properties over time a little quicker because they're often, based on leaves, and the essential oils in the leaves can evaporate, degrade, whatever the case may be over time. But I think when it comes to spices, especially whole spices, they're going to last a long time. And I also think the powders are going to do pretty well too. So think about, what type of spices do you like? Do you like to have peppercorns? Do you like to have chilies? Do you like to have the various other seeds that are wonderful for making different types of dishes, like cumin and coriander? So think about all of those and then decide which you want to put on the shelf of your survival pantry. So seasonings for your survival pantry, you can't go wrong with whatever you choose. Category number 10, sweeteners. Number 23, honey or other forms of liquid sweeteners. And number 24, dry sweeteners. You can never go wrong when it comes to storing honey, because honey literally is a forever food. This is going to last beautifully in your survival pantry, and it's going to provide a whole host of nourishment. Honey obviously is sweet, and something a little sweet can be very comforting when going through difficult times. But honey, unlike white sugar, has more nutrition in it. And recently I was just reading an article about how honey can actually help people with weight loss. People who crave a little sweet have found, scientists have been studying honey, and they found that there's a lot of various nutrients in honey that they weren't aware of before that can very quickly soothe and comfort a sweet tooth and prevent overindulgence. So I don't know, maybe there's something to it, but I know I like honey very much. And you really can store any type of honey. This is just a liquid honey. This is raw and unfiltered. This is just a local honey from here in the Austin area. I often like to have local honey. I think that there's been a lot of research done. You read a lot about people who have allergies, and that if they take honey on a daily basis that is from honey that's local to their area, and that the bees have been using the pollen from local plants and flowers, that this can be very helpful in potentially helping the person who has allergies to develop some resistance to it. So maybe there's something to that. You can also have any type of honey like this, like these nice creamed honeys. I love this too. I love honey. So does my mom. And she's 98 years old. So I always kind of look to her. And she's pretty much eaten honey almost every day of her life. So there must be something to it. But this is a wonderful forever food. You can stick this on your survival pantry. You don't have to worry about it. You can use this in baking. You can substitute this for white sugar. Of course, could white sugar be in your survival pantry? By all means. White sugar is, in essence, a forever food. It'll last indefinitely. It's had all of the molasses stripped out of it, and it's not going to clump. It's not going to do anything. It's just going to be in its state of white sugar, basically for forever. However, it doesn't give us any nutrition. And depending on what our situation is going to be over the long term, over a long-term emergency, we always want to make sure that the foods that we're putting in our survival pantry are foods that can give us optimal nutrition. And so you can't go wrong with this is a nice pourable liquid honey, or a cream honey. Now, what about other liquid sweeteners? Yes, they last indefinitely as well. You can have molasses. It's very rich in iron. That can be a wonderful source of nutrition. You can also have date syrup. You can store coconut syrup, maple syrup. The only caveat about maple syrup is that you can store it long term, assuming it's never been opened. Once you open maple syrup, you will have to refrigerate it, because it does have a higher water content, so it can go rancid. But molasses is a beautiful sweetener to store. And the iron content makes it wonderfully nutritious. As a matter of fact, when I was growing up, my mother would always give me a little glass of milk with like a teaspoon or a tablespoon of molasses swirled in it because she wanted to always make sure I had enough iron no matter what situation we were in terms of money and the food we were having. She wanted to make sure that I had enough iron in my diet to grow up healthy. And so we always had molasses on hand, and she was always swirling it in milk. And so that's another wonderful liquid sweetener to think about keeping on hand. Next, what did I have down here? Number 24 were our dry sweeteners. And again, these basically, they're forever foods. These are not going to go bad, and they're going to last a very long time. And to be honest with you, I personally think that these store very well in the packaging in which you purchase them. You don't want to be trying to put these in situations where you're sucking out all the moisture. They're going to be hard like a brick. They often store very nicely. I've actually had these, talking about Survival Pantry, I've had these a long time, and I'm confident that they're well past their best buy date or best use by date, and they're just fine. And you can just pop these on your shelf. It's really a matter of what you like. What I've got here is coconut sugar. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as coconut palm sugar, sometimes coconut sugar. It's basically all the same thing. And a lot of people like coconut sugar because it has a lower impact on something called the glycemic index. And that is a program that some people will follow in terms of how different foods affect our insulin and glucose levels and so on and so forth. And coconut sugar is lower on the glycemic index often than other sweeteners. So people like to stock this. I find this is a great forever food, a great food for the Survival Pantry because it does contain a lot of nutrition. And it really is got a lovely flavor. If you're thinking, oh, I don't like coconut too much, this does not taste like coconut. This basically tastes like brown sugar, and it can be substituted very easily for brown sugar in pretty much any recipe. So I highly recommend this one. Now, let's take a minute to talk about this. What I've got here is Sucanat. And all that Sucanat stands for is sugar cane natural. They just took the sugar and then the cane and then natural and made a new word, Sucanat. Depending on where you live, you may also know this as Rapadura. There are different names for this, but either Sucanat or Rapadura are basically, as the name implies, sugar cane natural. It's just whole sugar cane juice that has been dehydrated into what's now a dry sugar, a dry sweetener. And this is much more nutritious than white sugar. I use a lot of Sucanat in my baking, and even if a recipe calls for white sugar, like what we consider cane sugar or white sugar, I will just substitute this one for one. It gives it a slightly richer flavor, and I don't really worry about that, and I feel happy that I'm limiting how much white sugar that I'm bringing into the home or using in our diet. Because I do use white sugar when making jams and jellies if I'm going to water bath can them, because I've just found the results to be a little better. This has the potential to burn sometimes in water bath canning situations. So for jams and jellies, but I do make low sugar versions, which I've shared with you in videos here. I'll link to those below if that's something that interests you, as well as no sugar versions. But if you have a really nice sweet fruit. But this I will often, if a recipe calls for brown sugar, if it calls for white sugar, I'll often just substitute this Sucanat. I'll do the same with coconut sugar. And I feel at least this has all the molasses intact and it's not been stripped out of it, so it's a much more nutritious option. And as I said, these are both well past their best use by date. And as you see, they're still soft. They're just fine. So these are great for your survival pantry. So your liquid sweeteners, honey, molasses, date sugar, coconut sugar, or coconut syrup, excuse me, date syrup. All of these are wonderful liquid sweetener options. And then for your dried sugars, your coconut sugar, your sucanat, date sugar, maple sugar, those are all the dried forms. So you can have both the liquid forms and the dried forms, whatever suits your fancy, so to speak, and you'll be all set having some form of sweetener in your survival pantry. Category number 11 are veggies and fruits. So under our umbrella of veggies and fruits, we have number 25, canned items. And in that, I'm also including bottled items, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then number 26 are your dried options. Now, keeping canned veggies and fruits in your survival pantry are wonderful options to have because, again, these have very long shelf lives, basically indefinite, as long as they've been stored properly. And then, of course, always take caution if you open them years later to make sure that the food inside does look safe to eat. And it should be, which is good news for those of us who want to be able to stock these things. And what I want to show you here is that you can basically put on your survival pantry any canned or bottled foods that you think you're going to use, that you like to use, that in the event you do want to rotate them into your backup food supply or into your working pantry, they're all things that you can basically rotate through and then restock your survival pantry. Things that I like to keep on hand, as you can see, are a lot of tomato products. I love things like this that have diced tomatoes with chilies. I do live in Texas, so we make a lot of things with chilies. Also, my Italian heritage, I love having little baby Roma tomatoes like this, crushed tomatoes, any type of tomato product, because these work so well when being used to make a variety of foods. I can always use tomatoes. And these will most likely, I know from opening, because these are brands that I use, the cans are lined in a way to protect the tomatoes from leaching anything from the metals that the cans are made out of. So that's something good. Sometimes it'll say it very clearly on the can. Other times you may not know this until you open it, and then it's just good to keep a record of that so you know what brands are probably going to be best to put on the shelves of your survival pantry and that will last the longest. You know, even though, yes, it's great that the U.S. Department of Agriculture says that all of these things basically don't go bad, they may just lose some of their strength and flavor in terms of losing some of their strength in terms of nutrition, flavor. Obviously, that's understandable after many years. But you also want to make sure that you're also choosing smart canned goods to put on your survival pantry, that they are canned appropriately in the way that you want them to be canned. And looking at the labels can be very important. Like, for example, these are our H-E-B green beans, and we enjoy green beans. Even our dog enjoys green beans. And these are, it talks about it right here, that it's a non-BPA lining. And that's a long word, which I won't try to pronounce, but basically it's a chemical that many people want to be able to avoid. So finding foods that are canned in cans that have linings that you consider to be more healthy than others are a good option. And this is just the store brand. They're very affordable and they're canned very nicely. Again, though, as you notice, a lot of cans today do come with the pop tops, and so we kind of want to do our research and find out if the U.S. USDA does consider these to basically have the same indefinite shelf life that a canned product like this does. And hopefully it should be okay. Also jarred foods, and I wanted to specifically show these because this is how sweet red bell peppers or various types of peppers are often packaged. They're often skinned, roasted, and then packed in some sort of vinegar or oil solution. I like to find those that are simply packaged in some type of brine that does not contain any oil, only in the sense that if I want to keep this for a long time, I feel that the oil would go rancid at some point, even though it's well sealed. So, and the reason that I specifically like to have peppers is that, and these sweet peppers, is because they're very high in vitamin C. So that's another thing, going back to what the theme that I've had throughout this, is that the foods we put in our survival pantry, we want to make sure these are nutritious foods, preferably nutrient dense, like the fish. Make sure you have some nutrient dense foods, but also make sure that you have foods that are rich in vitamins and minerals. And these red peppers are very rich in vitamin C, and they're also very tasty. And so this is definitely a wonderful type of jarred food to have on your survival pantry. Also, if you like tomato products but you're uncomfortable stocking canned tomato products, the good news is today many tomato products are sold in jars. So you can stock those that are sold in glass jars on your survival pantry shelves. And something I wanted to mention here, although technically I'm not 100% sure what category olives would fall into, but what's nice about olives is you can find many of them packaged in jars and packaged in a brine as opposed to an oil. But olives are rich, obviously it's where we get olive oil from, and they're very nutritious, but packed in a brine like this of salt water and vinegar helps really extend the shelf life of the olives. So that's something that you may want to think about and do a little research and see what you think about maintaining olives in a brine like this that have been, canned in essence, put into a jar as opposed to a can. But that's a funny thing. I want to mention that some people say, why do they call it like home canning? Why do they call it canning when y'all are putting everything in jars? I think that's funny. But the fact that these have been professionally, canned from the factory, I like to think that the shelf life on these olives will be pretty good. So that's what I wanted to talk about for canned foods. It can be fruits. If they're fruits, I tend to like to find those that are canned in their own juices as opposed to sugar. I also like to look for those things that are canned in bottles, just that it's nice that they're canned in glass. I feel the food is really going to stay fresh, and as long as I keep this in a dry, dark, cool pantry. So you have a lot of options when it comes to canned or bottled foods. So think about what you like, what you enjoy eating, and make sure you get some of that on your survival pantry shelf. Now let's talk about the dried versions of foods. What I've got here in the front are dried fruits. Very common, very easy to find at your grocery store. And I really believe, not unlike the sugars that we mentioned before, storing these in the package in which they are purchased, I personally think works out very well. And I think that their shelf life does last a long time. So I think you can never go wrong putting dried fruits. I've got some apricots here. I've got the currants here. The Zante, is it Zant? I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce it, but I love these. I love these for when I make like an Irish soda bread. They're a little smaller than raisins, and I just think they're very nice. And then in here I've got some golden raisins. Again, I think any dried fruit is a wonderful long-term option for a survival pantry. These are unopened. They're stored in a bag from the factory and then in the box. So dried fruits, definitely a plus for your survival pantry. And what's nice about those is that they're very rich in nutrition. It's very concentrated, and they often have a sweet flavor, which is nice, especially if times are turbulent or difficult. Having a little sweet treat is always enjoyable. And they provide a lot of nutrition. They're very dense because they've been dried. And so this is definitely something that you want to have on your shelf. Now, what about dehydrated foods? Can you dehydrate your own foods? Sure. And there's a wonderful girl here on YouTube. I don't know what her name is, but I believe the name of her channel is The Purposeful Pantry. And she spends so much time showing how to dry different types of foods. And I also have a video where I show you a very easy way to dehydrate a lot of foods by simply taking frozen foods that have already been cut and washed and all of that, and drying those so that you can get those onto your pantry shelf, and that you don't have to really do all the intensive work involved in cutting everything up. But certainly if you have a garden and you're growing things and you can dehydrate them and store them for long-term storage, all the better. And the gal at the Purposeful Pantry has a lot of tips on how to store dehydrated foods for the long haul. So I will definitely put a link to her channel. But here you can also find a lot of dried foods, and for reasonable prices. What I've got here are dried gourmet mixed mushrooms that I found. I guess these are, I think I got these at Costco. And but you can find these today at all the big box stores. You can find them at your grocery store. So if you want to put dehydrated foods into your survival pantry, I think that's a wonderful option. And you can, here in this case, we have the dried foods, the dried fruits, which I think store beautifully. And I've got mushrooms here, dried dehydrated vegetables, can store very well. And then what I've got here are potato flakes. This, I'm telling you, this is a forever food. But it also has so many uses. But potato flakes are great for a survival pantry. And you can turn these into mashed potatoes. You can make a loose solution of like a potato water, and you can use that to feed your sourdough starter. It'll gobble it right up. There are a lot of uses for potato flakes. And you can thicken soups and stews with them. There's just a lot of things that you can do. And so this is a wonderful food to have on your pantry shelf. And potatoes do offer nutrition. So that is a very good thing to know. And they I just feel are like such a comfort food. And if you're able to make mashed potatoes, and even if you don't have butter, but you've got some of the ghee, and you put some of that on your mashed potatoes with your sea salt, you have a true comfort food, a true comfort meal. And you often have to think about that when you're putting your survival pantry together. And that's why, I do have a section about sweeteners, because you want to make sure you have foods that bring you comfort and that offer some enjoyment, especially if you are going through difficult times, and especially if those difficult times are extended difficult times. And so having something that you can turn into mashed potatoes, for many people, that is a comfort food. And so I highly recommend that when it comes to stocking these type of, and I know this is a tuber, I'm putting it sort of in the vegetable category, but having some dehydrated vegetables that you like, maybe being able to make a mushroom soup, maybe being able to just enjoy these tossed in some ghee, or any other vegetables that you've dehydrated, having your potato flakes. These are all very important, useful, long-term foods, but those that can also bring a lot of comfort. Category number 12 and number 27, whole grains. And before I forget, I just want to remind you to be sure to check the link in the description below and head over to my website, Mary's Nest, same name as my YouTube channel, where you can print out your survival pantry checklist. Now, I do have a little fella hiding behind here that I'm sort of including in the whole grains category, although technically this is not a whole grain, it's white rice. But white rice is basically a forever food. It's had the bran and the germ stripped off of it. So yes, technically is it less nutritious? Yes, that is true. But you can increase the nutrition if you've got some bone broth or you've got some sea salt, and you can cook it. You can cook the rice in those instead of just water and no salt. You can add a little ghee. There's a lot of things that you can do to use white rice as a vehicle to add in other nutrition into one's diet. But the reason that we consider stocking white rice in our survival pantry as opposed to brown rice is that brown rice has a very short shelf life. Because it contains the bran and the germ, it goes rancid relatively quickly. So brown rice is the type of thing you really just want to have in your working pantry if it's something that you eat and you want to use it up relatively quickly. White rice you can pack in Mylar bags with an oxygen absorber, and it can be stored for a very, very long time. But I also think that white rice in the original packaging that it comes in can be stored for a very long time. So you have some options available to you. And the reason is this is just sort of a small bag. You can buy rice in all size bags. And if you buy them in larger bags and maybe the bag is paper, or it's not particularly well sealed, then it makes sense to repackage your rice in different ways to keep keep air away from it, and also bugs and so on and so forth. But the reason that I'm showing this one in particular, and this is something I just got at my grocery store when they had a sale, but basmati rice has become very popular because this is a very, in essence, for lack of a better word, it's a very clean rice. I highly recommend that you do your research about rice, but some rices have been found to contain more lead than others. It's very unfortunate. But here in the United States, rice grown in California is usually free of lead. And basmati rice is nice, going back to what I talked a little bit about earlier as to the glycemic index. If that is a particular way of eating that you follow, basmati rice, even in its white rice form, can have less impact on our blood sugar levels. So that's something, do your research, there's so much information about this, on the internet that you can find and read and decide what type of rice that you would like to stock. But white rice is terrific for a survival pantry. You can't go wrong with this, and you've got your beans, rice and beans, you're all set. But now I want to talk about whole grains in general. Whole grains have a very long shelf life. There are differences in opinion as to how long, and it often boils down to which grains you're talking about. Some whole grains, people will say have a shelf life of 8 to 10 years. Other whole grains, people will say have a shelf life up to 25 years. And other whole grains, people will just say it's a forever food. It's like, it's a whole grain, it's going to last forever. And so I think, in being realistic, whole grains for the most part are perfect for a survival pantry, whatever whole grain you pick. Whole grains in their whole form, stored correctly, are going to last a long time. Now, In terms of putting them in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers, yes, you can do that. However, I definitely want you to watch, if this is something you're thinking about doing, you'll want to watch my video on where I talk about Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers, because there are some very strict rules as to what can be put in a Mylar bag with an oxygen absorber. And there are some exceptions in the whole grain family that cannot be put in a Mylar bag with an oxygen absorber. You need only those grains that are incredibly dry and have a history of being known to be very dry. And that's sort of the general rule with a Mylar bag and with an oxygen absorber. Only very dry foods can be sealed that way. Now, some people will say, oh, but I saw jerky had an oxygen absorber in there and a silica gel pack. But if you notice, the package wasn't tight. If you've ever seen a Mylar bag, all of the air is basically sucked out of it, and it's very, very tight. And that is because of the level of oxygen absorber that was put into the Mylar bag that caused that to happen. And again, you want foods that are considered very dry. I have a lot of information about this on my webpage, where I have the blog post that corresponds with the video where I talk about Mylar bags, and I'll definitely have all of that. I have a very extensive playlist where I try to put all of this together for you, curated all in one place, and it'll say like food storage and so on and so forth, and that'll be in the description below. And it's also on my homepage, at my YouTube homepage, Mary's Nest, right here on YouTube. I have that curated on the homepage if you scroll down. And in that food storage playlist, I have all of these videos talking about silica gel packs, talking about oxygen absorbers, talking about all of the various ways one could store food for an extended period of time, including Mylar bags. I have foods for the general backup. I talk about foods for the general backup foods pantry. I talk about foods for the emergency pantry. It's an extremely detailed playlist, and you can kind of just look through and see which video you want to pick, or a host of them to help you on this journey, especially if you're new to creating an extended or prepper pantry. But getting back to whole grains, so whole grains in this whole form, what I've got here are oat groats. And if the term oat groat is new to you, it's basically just the whole oat. It's not cracked, like as in the cracked oats that you'll buy often as a porridge, like Irish oats or Scottish oats that you make oatmeal out of. And they're not flaked. They're not old-fashioned rolled oats that have been flaked. And oat groats are so versatile, and I highly recommend stocking them. As I said, they have a very long shelf life. They're perfect for your extended pantry, specifically in your survival pantry, but in your emergency pantry, your prepper pantry. Oat groats are one of those foods that is terrific to have, because if you have a hand mill grinder, you can grind this into flour, and you have oat flour. Oats are a naturally gluten-free food. If gluten is a serious problem for you and you need to make sure that 100% gluten-free, you just want to make sure that the packaging says they were processed in a plant where they weren't exposed to gluten. But you can make an oat flour. You can crack these and turn them into a porridge. You can even cook them whole as a side dish the way you would rice. You can make them sweet or savory. And you don't even have to crack them if you don't want to turn them into oatmeal. I have a video where I show you how to do this. You can, if electricity is available to you, and you can roast them in your oven or maybe outside, if you have a little outside grill or something. You can toast these. They're wonderful when they're toasted. And then you can soak them overnight in some acidulated water. And what's fantastic is you can turn these very easily into oatmeal. And so you're never going to go wrong having oat groats on hand. Now, you can have wheat berries, you can have the modern day red wheat berries, you can have the modern day white wheat berries, you can also have any of the ancient grains. You can have einkorn, you can have spelt, you can have emmer. You can also have things like rye groats. Some will refer to those as groats instead of rye berries, but you may also know them as rye berries for making rye flour. So there's a whole host of whole grains that you can have that will serve you very well, because they will be able to maintain their nutrition for a very long time, as long as they're stored properly and they've not been ground into flour. Because once you grind these into flour, they do contain the bran and the germ, and those contain oils, and so there's the chance of them going rancid. And you should probably use, I'm a sort of a firm believer that whole grain flours should be used within 6 months. But having the whole grain, you can store them for a very long time without any concern, and pretty much any whole grain that you like to eat and that you like to have in your diet. Now, I do have one bonus for you that I want to take a minute to talk to you about. Now, as a bonus for keeping in your survival pantry, I want to mention that vinegar and naturally fermented soy sauce are both perfect. These I consider forever foods. This is my homemade apple cider vinegar. I actually make it from apple scraps. I have a 3-part video series where I show you how to make this homemade, and it's raw, it's great, it adds probiotics into our digestive system. Definitely something that's very important to always keep in mind, making sure that we do have the ability to have probiotic-rich foods or beverages, or in this case, vinegar, which we can make a drink with a little water, a little honey, a little vinegar. Very good for our system. So having some vinegar, here I've got like a coconut vinegar. You can buy this. You can definitely have things like this in your survival pantry. But by all means, if you've got apple scraps or some apples, looking a little past their prime, so to speak, and you want to make some apple scrap vinegar, I highly recommend it. It's very easy to do, and this basically, it's a forever food. You do not need to refrigerate this. You can just, it's very acidic, and I show you, like I said, it's a 3-part series video. I go through from start to finish for you, right to decanting it and how to store it. It can be stored at room temperature, nothing to worry about. You're not going to have any problems with this, and this is perfect for your survival pantry. Also, in our home, we do enjoy using a lot of soy sauce, and if you can find a real soy sauce, one that is naturally fermented, that is basically a forever food. And when you open this and start to use it, you don't need to refrigerate it. You can put this right into your working pantry. And you can keep this in your survival pantry if soy sauce is something that you enjoy, especially one that's naturally fermented. This is the real deal, not like some of the more artificial ones that you see at the grocery store. And this is pretty easy to find online, and I highly recommend it. So definitely vinegars, homemade, raw, perfect. Soy sauce, perfect. These are going to be wonderful, not only for flavorings, but especially in the case of the raw apple cider vinegar, wonderful, wonderful for good health. Now, if you want more information about the whole pantry system, especially the extended or prepper pantry, be sure to click on this video over here where I have my full playlist covering everything, literally from soup to nuts, or should I say from apples to Mylar bags and beyond. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.